All right, everybody. Again, this is Lance. I'm the Science and Operations Officer here at the Weather Forecast Office in Houston, Galveston. And we'll get started with our Tropical Storm Laura briefing here. First of all, since we just had a briefing a few hours ago, you probably want to know what's changed. Well, the peak intensity of the forecast of Laura has increased slightly before landfall, 110 miles per hour now, and that's right on the cusp of a Category 3. So if the forecast increases any more on Tuesday, it would be a Category 3 with any increase at all. There were no changes to the watches and the warnings. And concerning the watches or warnings, I know we've already had a question or two in the chat. Yeah, this is our expectation right now, based on the forecast track that we have, and unless there was, a shift to the west, I would say about 30 or 40 or 50 miles tomorrow. Those watches would probably become warnings tomorrow. But we have to monitor closely when exactly that turn comes, and if it were to edge in a little bit more to the west into southeast Texas, it's possible hurricane watches could be expanded slightly. So I just want to address that. It's just we're on the west side, so we can cut it pretty thin, but we can only cut it so thin if it were to deviate a little bit more. So Laura has been getting better organized this evening. I've got a satellite imagery here that's recent, and you can see there's some convection now, more on the north side than what we've been seeing. And aircraft recon has been in there, and they're seeing the start of a formation, maybe an eye wall that's kind of wrapping on the east and north side there, where you see some intense convection. And it's beginning to pull away from that northwest tip of Cuba. And they've also noticed the pressure has fallen to 996 millibars, so that's a few millibars than it was a few hours ago. And they have a surface observation of some wind gusts around 56 knots. So it does look like, as we anticipated, as Laura begins to pull away from Cuba, the conditions are ripe for intensification, and we may be seeing the beginnings of that. So here's the track that you've been looking at now for about a day with very little change. It edged maybe 10 miles, maybe 10 or 15 miles west, but it's really less than the size of the dot. And when you look at the error cone, it's very, very similar, kind of cutting around Galveston and then over to the east near Intercoastal City, Louisiana. So that's at 48 hours. That's about an 80-mile wide error on each side is the average error. So that's the area of concern, and of course you see the hurricane watch in pink up for that area and just a little bit outside of that. So if this is a well-behaved hurricane, that's the expectation, and so that's again why we have the watches where they are. There's also a tropical storm watch just to the left and right of the hurricane watch area. And you don't see the M on the graphic yet. That's a major hurricane, but like I said, we're close. We're getting close there at that 48-hour point on Wednesday evening. Dan showed this, a nice summary, kind of to see the areal extent inland. The hurricane watch shown in purple, tropical storm watch in orange. So I think that there was no changes there. So hopefully that is pretty straightforward, because we already talked about that one earlier at 4. We also talked about these arrival times and tropical storm wind probabilities. Very consistent on the movement and timing. Those tropical storm force winds should reach the coast at some point Wednesday evening. Could be 2 or 3 hours earlier than 8 p.m. So 4 or 5 p.m. it's possible, especially when some rain bands begin to come on shore. And then of course you see the highest probabilities in kind of extreme southeast Texas there. And into southwest Louisiana, with now the point probabilities, which is any given point. A lot of those points are up around 80% now off to our east, and that makes sense. We have as the hurricane gets closer, these probabilities go up as time is kind of built into the probabilities. The 50-knot wind, I like to show this because this kind of relates to damaging winds. 58 miles per hour is our severe thunderstorm threshold. So when you start to see these probabilities creeping up, over 50%, those are the areas you could probably expect some power outages. Could expand a little bit more than that, but that's a good benchmark there. because that's 58 is a good benchmark for damaging winds, as we know. And again, you see the higher values, they just keep increasing a little bit. If you notice what the previous advisory was, it was a little bit lower than this. So now we have some 70 to 80% there at points along the southwest Louisiana coast. And same story with the hurricane probabilities. These will go up too as Laura approaches the central Gulf of Mexico tomorrow. Now we showed this earlier too. When we start running our storm surge model, we start trying to come up with some graphics to communicate surge, and this hasn't changed. I will say make note of that 4 to 6 foot inundation from Port Bolivar to High Island. That is the area in our area where we expect the highest storm surge values. And then some 2 to 4 foot values kind of down the coast to San Luis Pass. And, this is a peak storm surge, based on the track that we have and maybe a little bit of air in that track. But it doesn't mean every location along that coastline will see that kind of inundation. And I'll show you another graphic that kind of helps hone in on that. So you might remember this. We showed this during Harvey some. This comes from our ensemble of modeling, and the blue areas have kind of zoomed in a little bit on the right-hand side in our watch area, but the blue areas are generally 1 to 3 feet of inundation, and the yellow areas are greater than 3 feet of inundation. So it just gives you a little bit more resolution as to where you might see the more significant inundation. And especially when you look here on the Bolivar Peninsula, the reason you're getting some of those 4 to 6s is there's some areas of yellow in the very vulnerable areas where we expect, we could see as much as 6 feet of storm surge in those areas. And these change a little bit from run to run, and they're always one advisory behind because it takes a while to run the modeling. So once the new track comes in, then it kicks off the storm surge modeling. So this is actually the modeling off of the advisory from this afternoon, and then we'll be getting the one that just came out now a little bit later. And that update's on the Hurricane Center website. Now you can kind of see why the storm surge watch and warning area is the way it is. It's tied a lot to those areas that we just showed that we're expecting some inundation. You notice how it goes much further inland into southwest Louisiana and even in the Beaumont-Port Arthur area than it does as you get down the coast. And it's all looking at that kind of guidance that I just showed you. I'm not going to dwell too much on the wave heights. This has been pretty well covered. If the core of it stays just to our east, we will have those 15 to 20 foot seas, kind of probably beyond 20 nautical miles. If the core gets a little closer, then we'll see over 20 foot seas there out beyond 20 miles, especially on Wednesday evening. This didn't change much either. Locally in Southeast Texas, our part of Southeast Texas, so basically east of High Island, 1 to 4 inches. You get near High Island and to the east, it's going to be significantly more. And these are average totals. Locally, you can see a little bit higher than that where rain bands train. But yes, in Southwest Louisiana, pretty close to us, that could see 6 to 10 inches of rain kind of right off to our east where the core of Laura is expected to track. The excessive rainfall outlook, the slight risk may expand it just a little bit to the west compared to earlier, but that's just due to some of that wraparound convection and rain bands that could train a little bit pretty much east of Houston, just east of Galveston and up into East Texas. So some key takeaways, these are similar to what Dan presented to you earlier. We haven't changed any watches at this point. We do have a pretty confident in the track being over Southwest Louisiana or for Far East Texas. We couldn't rule out a shift a little bit anyway to the west, so we're monitoring that. We are increasing our confidence that Laura will become a Category 2 or 3 hurricane now prior to landfall, especially starting to see that strengthening as she pulls away from Cuba. Okay, and with that, I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording and we'll unmute everybody.